Hello, it's Moira here, and in this video tutorial we're going to look at how to make a fringe border for a crocheted rug. The fringe I'm going to show you is a tasseled fringe, and this is what the end result will look like. We are going to use the ends that we already have, and we're going to incorporate one more strand of yarn into those ends. We're going to need a crochet hook and extra strands of yarn. I cut my extra strands of yarn at 20 centimeters in length, and to make this very quickly I create a card that's 20 centimeters wide, and I just wrap the yarn around this card as many times as I require. Just wrap it around the card as many times as you want, and then cut it at the end, and then cut the yarn from the card. These strands are 40 centimeters in length at the moment, and I require 20 centimeter strands, so I'm just cutting them in half. At the end of every row I've got 2 strands because this was a rug and it was doubled up, so I'm going to add one more strand doubled to give me a 4-strand tassel. On each end of the rug I've got 3 strands because I've got the strand from my crab stitch and the strands from my slip stitch row. So I'm going to add one more double into there, and that will be a 5-strand tassel. Our first tassel is going to have 5 strands. The strand from the crab stitch row, the 2 strands from the slip stitch row, and then that extra strand that we are going to add in. Using a crochet hook, we're going to insert, we can find a space right next to that slip stitch row, and we are going to insert our hook through that space and pull our yarn through to make a loop. Now we've got our loop, we're going to pull the 3 strands that are already there through this loop, and then we're going to pull the 2 strands that are attached to the other end of the loop through the loop too. Make sure those 2 strands stay even, so that when we pull it tight, we've got even strands on our tassel. And now we've got our first tassel created. You can see I'm pulling it very tight there. So now we're ready to do the next tassel in the row. So identify again where you're going to insert your hook. There's a nice little space just above that end strand there that I'm inserting my hook into. Make sure that your yarn that you're going to pull through is doubled up evenly. Pull through to make your loop that you're going to insert all 4 strands of your tassel through that loop. I'm just making sure here that my ends are actually even, and now I'm going to pull the 4 strands through and then pull those 2 strands nice and tight, and then tighten up my tassel. Always make sure your tassel is as tight as you can actually make it. Those first 2 tassels had obvious spaces where I could insert my hook into, but now I don't have any obvious spaces, and this is because I'm at the end with my last border stitch. If you've started on the end with your first border stitch, you will have spaces to insert your hook into. However, because I've got no obvious stitch here, I'm going to insert my hook through the stitch itself. Insert your hook through the stitch from the right to the left, and I'm using a small hook because it's got a sharper point. Then I'm going to get my piece of yarn and double it up as I did with the last 2 tassels, making sure again it's nice and even. Pull this piece of yarn through the stitch to make my loop as I usually have, and then I'm going to pull all 4 strands through that loop. Now when I pull them through the loop, do make sure that your stitch is tightened up and you tighten up the stitch that you've just went through and the actual loop itself. So you can see there I'm actually pushing up on the loop and tightening the stitch. So if your crochet project doesn't have an obvious space where you need to insert your hook to make your tassel, you can go through the stitch itself. Just make sure when you're tightening that tassel up that you tighten up the stitch as well as the loop of the tassel you've just created. So a quick recap is you insert your hook from right to left through your stitch, double up your yarn and pull it through to create a loop, and then with that loop you're then going to insert all 4 strands through the loop. And then to tighten the knot that we've just created, is called a lark's head knot. We are going to pull on the 2 strands from the piece of yarn we just added, and also we're going to pull on the stitch that we actually went through. I'm going to carry on down this row, adding in 1 more strand of yarn with a lark's head knot, and that creates my tassels. Lark's head knots, by the way, are what's used constantly in macrame projects, so they're very strong knots. I'm only adding in 1 strand of yarn to make a 4-strand tassel, and this is because I've actually previously created some samples and decided that a 4-strand tassel was suitable for my project. You, however, might decide that you want more strands of yarn in your tassel because that is more suited to your project. If that's the case, just add in as many strands of yarn as is required for your project. I've now created a few more tassels, and we can see just adding that 1 strand of yarn in does actually make it a tassel rather than an end, and it looks so much better. Once I've completed this side, I will trim my fringe down. Before I demonstrate my method of trimming my fringe to size, I'm just going to have a look at the other side of the rug. The other side of the rug has got first border stitches, and these are slightly different from the last border stitches we were working into. The stitch is too tight for us to actually get our hook into. It's not loose enough like the last border stitch. However, there is a space where we can insert our hook, like we did on the first 2 tassels of the other side. So once we've inserted our hook in this space, creating the tassel is no different than the way that we've been doing it. We create our loop with our lark's head, and then we pull our 4 strands through. So exactly as we did for those tassels on the other side, but instead of going through the actual stitch, we're going through the space we can see on the edge of our rug. So if you're adding fringes to an overlay mosaic crochet project, the way you create the fringes on each side is slightly different. The first border side, you actually go into the space, and the last border side, you actually go into the stitch. Once you've completed your fringe, you then have to decide what length you want your fringe to be. I've decided that I'm going to go for a 7 centimetre length to my fringe, and that is going to be a good length. If I want it a bit shorter, I can always cut it down again. So I'm just straightening out the tassels so that I've got a nice straight fringe going on. I use masking tape as a measure when I'm cutting my fringe to size, because I find that it's an awful lot easier to cut along an edge of masking tape than it is to just go with your eye. So I've now masked up at 7 centimetres in length. I'm just confirming that all my strands are nice and even and laid straight. I'm going to cut my strands with very sharp scissors. Starting from one end, I actually lift the masking tape off my table so that I'm actually working with it at a slight angle, and then I'm just cutting very, very carefully and slowly along the edge of my masking tape. If you've put your masking tape on tight enough, it should be holding on to your strands of fringe while you cut along it. You can see there my masking tape's holding that fringe nice and even for me. Once you're happy that your fringe is looking as even as you can possibly get it on the masking tape, pull the masking tape back off. You might want to pull the masking tape off actually have to trim up the odd piece to actually get it to be completely even. There are a couple of little bits that I need to actually go back and trim up. And now you can see how easy it is to actually add a fringe to your crocheted project. This has been an overlay mosaic crochet project, but you can actually add a fringe to any type of crochet project. If you have found this video tutorial useful, please do subscribe to daisyknots YouTube channel, and you can find many more resources over at daisyknots website. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful.